Welcome to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I am your host, Doug Stewart, and what I'm going to share with you is an exciting conversation that I got to have with James Lindsay, and it was co-hosted by Jacob Winograd. We did it in the LCI Green Room, actually just a few minutes ago. You're going to hear this a couple weeks later. If you follow us on YouTube and subscribe, you might have already heard this conversation, but that's where we posted it. So in the conversation, we talk about Israel, we talk about the woke right, we talk about anti-Semitism, we talk about critical theory, critical race theory. It was nearly 2 hours long, and James had recently been to Israel, so he had a lot to say about his experience there. So I'm sure you'll be interested in understanding how that changed his perspective at all. But we also challenged him on Israel's foreign policy, how it relates to American foreign policy. We talked about the kinds of things that, deal with like the rise of Christian nationalism and how it's influencing the Trump administration to some extent, and the conspiratorial nature of critical theory. It was a great conversation. James is great. When you sit down and talk to him, he's just a great person to converse with. He's funny. And I was really excited about this conversation. I've been wanting to make this happen for nearly 3 years, and Jacob Winograd actually was able to make this happen. And I wanted to share it as an episode. So here you go. Enjoy. All right. We are coming to you from the LCI Green Room, where we're recording with Dr. James Lindsay. He's founder of New Discourses and is author of the book Race Marxism, The Marxification of Education, and he's co-author of Cynical Theories, which is one of my favorite books. James is here to talk to us about a lot of things. We're going to talk about wokeism, the woke right, critical theory, Western civilization, American foreign policy, anti-Semitism. We have a whole list of things that we want to talk about. I'm Doug Stewart. I've got Jacob Winograd with me here hosting, because this is a big lift, because we have a lot of things we want to talk about. So James, I really appreciate that you took the time to have a conversation with us. And so, yeah, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So give us a little bit of a maybe more introduction than what I just said, that I listed some of your accomplishments there, but a little introduction to you and your work, and in particular, focus on, I would like to know how did you come into what seems to be like a pretty handy alliance with a lot of Christian organizations and people like Al Mohler and Michael O'Fallon, and just kind of like you've connected with some Christian figures. And, prior to that, I don't think anybody would have predicted that you would have kind of partnered with some of these places. So, just give us a little history of that.
Well, I mean, the partnership's straightforward. I do my best to tell the truth as best I can figure out what the truth is. And that tends to put you in alignment with other people who are trying to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have everything in full agreement, because the good faith appreciation of the truth and approach to the truth actually lines you up. So that's where differences become debates. And I mean, in the productive sense, not like two people on a podcast squabbling with each other, like that passes as debate, but that's not debate. So that's where that lines up. But that's just what I do. I tell the truth. But the story, I mean, it's such a weird story. It's always hard to tell. I don't want to like bog it down and take 15 minutes. But the long and short is that I study totalitarian ideologies, particularly up until the last year and a half or so, mostly communism. But now I've branched into fascism as well, which is basically just like this weird little, it's like the orphan child of communism. It's like the rebellious orphan child. It's the same ideology almost, with certain key changes. But I study these ideologies in order to explain them. I have something of a talent, I think, for explaining like philosophical concepts to people, not all the way down like for a 5-year-old, but more like for like a university undergraduate or whatever.
Okay.
So I'm trying to be like a bridge between the formal literature, whether it's primary sources, current academic literature, or whatever, and kind of normal people who got engaged in the culture war, to show them, my hypothesis was that I could show them that there is a source to a lot of this weird woke thinking, and that source actually contains a logic that can be understood, and it contains a use of vocabulary that can also be understood and therefore decoded. And I operated under this maybe naive, but I hope real assumption that if we understand the disease, then we can figure out the cure. I don't go around tooting my horn, claiming I have all the solutions in the world. One of my favorite things I catch myself saying all the time now is, if we had the solution, we wouldn't have the problem. We don't have the solutions to a lot of our problems, but finding those solutions usually begins with properly understanding the situation. So there's a Polish philosopher who had written, never attempt to cure what you don't understand, or a disease that you don't understand. So I've been trying to figure out the understanding part.
Yeah.
And I've been at it for, my background's, I'm trained as a mathematician, particularly in combinatorics, which leads you to give like kind of concrete descriptions of abstract mathematical things and find patterns and describe those patterns both mathematically and kind of in terms of allegedly, abstract concrete structures, whatever that means. But that was a good background to be able to read literature, see vocabulary being misused, and say, what must they mean by this? What must systemic racism mean? Because they never explain it very well. What is equity? What must this mean by the way that they use it? And so I started with jokes. I started by doing the Grievance Studies Affair a number of years ago. We wrote a ton of fake academic articles. Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose and I wrote 20 fake articles, put them out into the world. They were funny. They were really funny, actually. A bunch of them got accepted. 7 were actually accepted. 7 more were still under review. And in the process of actually studying the literature and interacting with the peer reviewers and the journal editors, I realized like this academic woke stuff's not a joke. Like this is going to unravel civilization, that it was already making its way into the corporate world. It had taken over the university architecture. Like we're in trouble. So I asked my wife, I was a massage therapist, as most people have heard at the time, doing all this kind of academic, prank stuff on the side. And I asked my wife if I could quit my job and dedicate all my time to understanding and exposing woke as fast as I could put it together. So I created new discourses. We started the plan in 19. So the Grievance Studies Affair came out in 18. We wrote Cynical Theories, Helen and I did, in 19. We started to organize new discourses in 19, but it didn't come together till the beginning of 2020. Cynical Theories came out in 2020, and basically is like my career got shot out of a cannon. I went from being kind of like 8,000 followers on Twitter to like 280,000 followers on Twitter in like a couple weeks when all this kind of hit at the same time, mostly after going on Joe Rogan right after George Floyd died, which sort of helped. And so I've spent all this time trying to decode and understand and explain woke ideology. I've been privileged to do this in a lot of kind of prestigious places, at the Oxford Union and the European Parliament, even the Japanese Parliament, the New Zealand Parliament. Like fancy places, Congress. And so it's been a lot of state houses in the US, like maybe about a dozen state legislatures, not always in the state house, actually only rarely in the state house, but visited maybe about a dozen of them. So it's been really, really cool. And of course, I've 45 states. I just picked up Israel. So I think that makes like 14 countries or something now that I've spoken in outside of the US too. It's been a fun ride. Yeah,
it's funny. I saw you in a picture in Israel from a friend of mine who's on Facebook, whom you know. What's his name? Jay Richards. I think he posted, and you were in that picture. I was like, wait a second, I know who that is.
Jay and Jay was in our delegation, as was Billboard Chris, and a filmmaker named Rob Montz that was new to us, but he's a smart, intriguing guy, makes really good films. He's got one coming about the Palisades fire right now that I think a lot of people are going to think is super interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned the Grievance Studies. Have you ever given thought that people are just trolling you when they write about feminist glaciology?
That was actually what triggered us to write the paper. There's a journalist named Matt Ridley. I don't know what he's doing in life now. I think he's still writing. I think he was for Spike or something like that back in 2016 when that happened. But he actually wrote an article about the feminist glaciology paper that was really published by 4 professors at the University of Oregon in the journal Progress in Human Geography, which had an impact factor of 7. So all the nerds will know this is actually something serious. It was on $400 and something thousand of National Science Foundation grant money. It's taxpayer money, libertarians, funding this feminism in glaciers. And so Matt Ridley wrote that this is what gave Peter and I the idea. He wrote an article about this enormously stupid glacier paper. And he wrote that if I got the paraphrase or the quote, I don't remember, it's been 8-10 years, but he's like, I still hold out that this is an elaborate academic hoax whose authors have not confessed yet. And that's what gave Peter and I the idea to write academic hoaxes. So the professors vehemently denied this. They went bonkers accusing, everybody of it being like, no, the paper's real. The university stood by it. The journal
didn't
stood
realize
by
that
it.
they were they were being mocked.
But they ended up getting a TED Talk out of this. So this woman who doesn't have a first name, she goes by the letter M, no period, just M, Jackson, does a TED Talk. You can go watch it. It's 20 minutes long. It's preposterous about this paper about the glaciology thing, feminist glaciers. And so talking about ice having sex and like crazy stuff. Like this paper just can't believe it. And then she's like, of course, what did she do? Like the last 5 minutes of her TED Talk is like, and we got death threats and it's like the whole like crybully playbook. But it was actually like, I don't think for a while we didn't know if they were trolling, but then like they're so committed to it and so fervent about it. If so, it is the most coordinated and committed troll involving hundreds of thousands of people in history.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it's interesting to me that you have become, you said this earlier, that you've become sort of like an expert in the source material. And I think that's one of the reasons that drew me to your work over the last couple of years, because I'll just give you a little picture of how I got into, digesting your content, but then also understanding critical race theory myself. And that is, I was seeing the left, whom I have, enough friends on the left on Facebook or whatever, kind of decrying that, Republican politicians were talking about the term woke in a way that was really low resolution, really kind of a low quality, just jab at people kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, that probably tracks. And I'm like, well, what does this word mean? And what does critical theory mean? And they're talking about teaching critical race theory in schools. Oh, they're not actually teaching that because that's a theory. They're of course not going to teach that to kindergartners, that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, well, what does the source material say? And, of course, when I look up that kind of stuff, I come across you. And, you lead me to books like the one by Delgado and Stefanchik. And when I hear people, and I want to ask you about this, I hear people talking about critical theory, critical race theory, and woke, and the people who are more in favor of this, or at the very least are like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. Especially Christians will look at this and say, everybody who's talking about what it means to be a critical race theorist that is against it just completely misrepresents it. And I'm just like, doesn't sound like it. So I went and read some of this and sort of test it out. Well, is James Lindsay reading these correctly, or am I just, believing him? No, I read this and I'm like, I don't know how you can come to any other conclusion. And so part of the problem, I think, in some of these things is that there's an issue with how popular terminology, how the popular people use it, the common people use it, and the academics use it, and it gets out there, and it feels to me like the language kind of gets run away. And so it's really easy to be like, well, how can you be against equity? And how can you be against diversity and inclusion? I was making those words. How can you be against these things? And then you read an article from you or a podcast from you, James, and people are like, oh, he's crazy. He doesn't know what those words mean. All it means is, we just want to include people. Of course, Mott and Bailey tactic there. But what do you make of the phenomenon of people kind of doing that? Because I don't think, I know the academics do the Mott and Bailey approach, but I don't know if that's what's happening with the general public. I think people are just sort of uninformed or underinformed.
Well, yeah, it's like they kind of do this like kind of organic, non-intentional Mott and Bailey by not engaging directly with what it actually says. I've been telling people for years on my superpowers that I actually read these things, I understand them, and I believe them. That's the whole formula. They read that they're opposed to the American constitutional order on the second page of that book you just held up.
Yes.
And I'm like, maybe they're opposed to the American constitutional order.
And then someone has the gall to tell me that that's critical theory is a continuation of the liberal project.
Right. Yeah. Which obviously also doesn't make sense because it's openly, in its own words, both on this end, that book being written, I think, for the first time in 2000. And then beforehand in the 1930s, when critical theory was coined, the civil rights movement happening in the middle of that period of time. In both ends, though, you find them saying that the liberal project, the classically liberal project, is the problem. So it is specifically designed to be critical of that, and is not a continuation. It's a hijacking of it. And so it's been, frustrating. I think like the 2021, I think that most of my speaking career in 2021 was taking that book, which I only have a digital copy of, by the way, but taking that book and just reading from it, like going on a stage and reading a page of that book and explaining to people like, no, it really says this. Right. And I remember having to argue with people. People would say critical race theory is not critical theory. And I'm like, put your finger over the word in the middle. What do you get? And it's like, here's a quote from Kimberly Crenshaw saying, we invented critical race theory because we were a bunch of racial justice activists doing critical theory. And it's like, you want to shake people by the lapels. But there's this kind of natural thing where people like hear extremism. This has actually got a name. It's called normalcy bias. They hear extremism and they reinterpret it as though it's normal. Like, they can't mean that. I know it says that, but it can't mean that. And either my great genius or my great stupidity was, I'm just going to take these people at face value. There was some decoding, like, what does the word equity actually mean? And that's what I was talking earlier about my math background helping. It's like this word diversity or inclusion sticks out like a sore thumb. How in the world can we be just about inclusion where the way that we achieve inclusion is by excluding a bunch of things and a bunch of people and rocks and stuff? And I thought, well, that's really weird. What do they really mean by this? And then I finally realized what it meant is including counter-hegemonic elements by pushing out anything that maintains hegemony. You have to have some background to understand what that means, but they believe that there is a status quo. There are things that uphold the status quo. That's called the hegemony. And what they're doing is bringing in elements. The inclusion part is to include elements that are outside of and hostile to that status quo and the maintenance of the status quo. And they then use this technique to say, the status quo hurts me because I'm against it. And so therefore, whether it's racist or sexist or transphobic or whatever, therefore we have to exclude those elements. And you can kind of get these inversions. The embarrassment for me was that the one thing that I was, and still am in many respects, too reluctant to study, given its relevance to what I do, is the Soviet Union. I always just kind of, put that in my back pocket. People understand the Soviet Union was communist and it was bad and a lot of people died and it was tyrannical. And I don't really want to dive into the details. It's very 20th century. It's very Russian. It's got a very unique character. And then this has led to me kind of humiliating myself year after year after year, where I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion for 4 years. And then later I find out that it was a Soviet program. But I just could have read that in the first place if I would have read the Soviet stuff that Lenin and Stalin put together in the 1920s. Korenizatsiya was kind of the umbrella name for how it got applied. But the big word here is within that was the word raznubratsiya in Russian, which was one of Lenin's big deals in the early Soviet Union, was we're going to focus on raznubratsiya, which meant diversity. You can look the word up in Russian today, it means diversity. My pronunciation's terrible, so nobody that speaks Russian will recognize it. But I think it sounds like Google Translate saying it as a robot, but it doesn't apparently. But anyway, that word diversity, as Lenin, this is one of those things. It's like finding keys to unlock doors. It's like this weird mystery game that I've been playing for years. So you go look up, what did Lenin say about raznubratsiya, about diversity? And he says that it's going to be diversity in form with unity in content. And all of a sudden you realize, diversity means more than people who look different. They also have to think the same. So they look different but think the same. And then all of a sudden you look at intersectionality and they have, people of color across the whole rainbow of melanin spectra. You got gay people across the whole gay rainbow or whatever it's called. You got all these different people with different backgrounds, different demographic statuses, but they all must hold a critical theory of the society and institution in the same way, using their identity factor as the tool. So you have diversity in form with unity in content. And suddenly it's like, I should have just read the Soviets in the first place, but you get it, right? Luckily, Marxists.org publishes this website called Marxists.org, and it has a glossary or an encyclopedia. I forget which one they call it. I think it's a glossary of terms. And they have thousands of words that normal people use as normal words that they explain that it means something different for communists. And you can literally just go read what they mean by it. It's like finding the Rosetta Stone and you have the hieroglyphs figured out. And then people are like, you're crazy. That's a bird. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, they call it encyclopedia. Same vocabulary, different dictionary. Yep.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and I remember being in 10th grade history, and I was raised in a typical conservative evangelical household, and the history teacher, as part of studying civics as a part of studying history, is telling us to because it was an election year, if I remember correctly, where it was just after election year, and we're supposed to write about like a political candidate that we'd want to, vote for and support. And what's funny is that like they said like, whoever you want. But then as soon as like me and like 3 other students picked the Republican candidate that we wanted to try to support, the history teacher is getting mad, and they're not even like, like they see that we're writing this, and they're like arguing with just us before like we've even like finished writing, and saying like, well, don't you think? And it's like this whole thing, like what you said, Doug, about like, well, there's
seriously, am I being detained?
Right. I hadn't gotten that a vocabulary device yet. But this whole idea that like, are they doing a intentional Mott and Bailey or not? And like, we're not really teaching critical theory because like that's the theory. But like, maybe a better way to do it is they're not like teaching the theory, but they're doing it.
They're
practicing it. Like they are, and then you get raised up in this way of thinking, shamed for not thinking the same way, and then you come out of a normal public school, even if you're in a public school in a red county like me, and you think you're conservative, but you have been conditioned to think along the lines of critical theory, which is why I fell in with the left shortly after coming out of high school. So yeah, I think it's, anyway, I thought that personal anecdote would kind of speak to what you guys are riffing about.
And the whole thing's conspiracy theory logic anyway. Is the society's all rigged up to benefit certain people. Those people may or may not even know they're being benefited by it, but they are. And so they have hidden class interests or identity-based interests that they're always going to defend, even if they don't know that they've become ideological in the sense that Marx used the term, which is like a prevailing cultural mythology that justifies the ruling class's status as ruler. So they all participate in this, and they cause all this oppression. And so what you end up with is people who come out thinking in terms of power dynamics are hidden everywhere, and then you've been lied to about everything. Things don't really work. If we look at history, we got told the lies about history. We didn't hear the right thing. And so sometimes that's true, right? Sometimes we really didn't hear the whole story about history. There's an old saying in education that education is a diminishing set of lies. Just because every subject matter is too complicated, you can't sit down with a first grader and explain like the intricacies of the Revolutionary War, but you can by the time they're in high school or in university or in graduate school doing a seminar class on the Revolution. So there's that aspect that education doesn't tell the whole story because it's too much, especially when you add in age. But then there's the fact that sometimes we had whitewashed stuff, and sometimes there are pieces that were kind of deliberately left out, and sometimes they're just lies. But what happens is, and sometimes people just get things wrong, right? Like I was, as everybody has already heard, I was just in Israel, and like the city of David is this huge thing in the Bible, right? Well, they didn't find it in Jerusalem until 2004. And the reason they found it was because a sewer pipe burst. So everybody just thought that this thing was a myth, except that it's in the Bible, until, whoops, a sewer pipe burst and they found it underneath this important street down the hill from the Temple Mount. And so they find this huge archaeological dig. And then they still don't believe it's the city of David until a lot of things start to confirm it. And because of this, in the last 21 years since this thing has been found, and the data keeps showing that it's very probably the biblical city of David, that now they're like, okay, maybe it's okay to use the Bible as a guide for archaeology in the Holy Land. But up to this point, that's been considered completely taboo. And so you get this sense, sometimes it's just like, there are good reasons and bad reasons that true things have been papered over. And what the critical theorists do is they tell an alternate history that tries to turn the whole thing into a giant conspiracy theory that you've been purposefully kept out of the idea. So this thing in Israel would be, a lot of people that were trying to be academic thought it was superstitious to believe the Bible, and we're trying to be, rigorous and scientific, and we're not going to be superstitious, religious heathens or whatever. I know that's a paradox, but at any rate, we're not going to do that, right? And so all of a sudden, they get egg on their face, but the critical theorists would be like, those academics knew the city of David was there, and they didn't want you to know, and they knew the Bible contained the secrets, and they didn't want you to know. Instead of it just being, typical human pride and arrogance and also like, where is it, right? If it was here, we would have found it by now, and it seems not to be anywhere. Well, it turned out that the Romans buried it, and so it was hard to find. In 70 AD when they destroyed everything. So that mentality of power dynamics ruling everything, conflict between classes being the shape of society, everybody in it for themselves, and there's some weird conspiracy among the people in power to maintain their power, that leaks into people. So, like you said, a lot of guys come out, they're conservative, and they get sucked into the left when they go off to university or they get involved in life. They stumble across, this happened to me, and it pulled me left a little bit, but I knew I realized immediately it was propaganda the first time. A friend of mine was like, have you ever read Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States? I'm like, no. He's like, you should read it. And I was like, okay. So I went and got a copy of it. I didn't think anything of it. And I'm like, anybody could get sucked in and be like, wow, they lied about Christopher Columbus. Holy crap. They lied about the workers. Oh my gosh, the Hoover Dam or whatever. And the fact is that this guy, what he's done is he's written an anti-America conspiracy theory about how history was told to suck you into believing that you got lied to about history so that you'll adopt his left-wing politics. And you're super susceptible to that. Yeah. If you've been cooked and stewed in that in your schooling.
Exactly.
To where you will even if you stay on the right wing and don't get pulled to the left, you still think in terms of power dynamics. Oh, well, you know what? They all lied to us. So it must be that actually people hate white people. And now we have to have a white identity politics to answer it because you've been cooked in the same leftist stew. So you end up getting this woke right phenomenon as a derivative to the same mentality, because it is the same mentality, which is a conspiracy theory based on a conflict-based identity politics, where most people don't even know that they're participating in the conspiracy. So being woke means and you're going to tear it all down. That's what critical theory is about in the first place.
Yeah, I think that, this discussion of power dynamics is interesting, and I think it's something, and we might bring this back up later as well, but it's really tough to broach this as libertarians because, and even probably as Christians, right? I mean, there's passages in the Bible that say we struggle against not flesh and blood, but against forces of darkness and powers and principalities. Libertarians are, so anti-government that then we can, sort of describe our opposition to certain policies or to certain, political administrations as a, resistance to tyranny, which I think is accurate. But then I think there's, as much as there is a tendency to maybe adopt a critical framework because of indoctrination, I've seen even libertarians struggle with, either smuggling in a little bit, or even just yesterday after I shared one of the posts with you, James, on X, and I was like, and someone's response was literally going, no, you don't understand. As libertarians, we're pro-identity politics, and we're pro-intersectionality, and we're pro-critical theory, because that's what we do. We expose power structures. And so, like, it's hard to kind of like separate the baby from the bathwater there, maybe, or to delineate between, like, recognizing, as you said, that sometimes people do lie about history, and sometimes there are tyrannical regimes. Sometimes there's even, like I think we saw during COVID, like we've seen Trump endure, there can be a sort of, conspiracy of interests that align to accomplish something, but that can, acknowledging that sometimes leads people to kind of like go down the slippery slope to viewing all of society and all of history through a lens of just, power and class warfare and everything is a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, a lot of libertarians fall into what I refer to literally as critical government theory. And so rather than being alert to the possibilities of tyranny, to the abrogation of people's inalienable rights by a government, which is a definition of tyranny, but it's not just even a government, right? Like part of the deal with the government, if we believe the American Constitution, is that it's to help secure people's rights to life, liberty, pursuit of that's the declarations. But we believe the Constitution, Bill of Rights, that the government is supposed to be small and is supposed to protect people's rights. That's the idea of the United States, right? Okay, so if we think about that, and that is still the Declaration, actually, but it's put together legal framework in the Constitution, just so people don't like jump up and down on me because I said some things in the Constitution, in the Declaration, and people get all like bent out of shape on the internet.
It's not the point. Just
this
nitpick
is the
here,
point.
right?
Yeah, this is not don't nitpick me, libertarians. Believe this. So the point is
not on this, guys. Not on
the
this.
idea is that any entity, the government, another individual, a corporation, whatever, has the capacity to abrogate somebody's inalienable rights. And the idea of the American system is to figure out a way to make a situation where nobody is actually in a position to abrogate other people's rights against their will. They can voluntarily consent to some kind of an arrangement, but they can't but there's limits on that. But they can't violate it. So the government's supposed to protect you, let's say, from a rapacious corporation to a certain degree, or from an individual who's trying to rob you. We give the government the power to put that person in jail, for example, deprive them of liberty because they tried to rob you, which is stealing your property rights and threatening your life probably in the process. And so we have this system that's designed to protect individuals from anybody stealing each other's inalienable rights or abrogating their rights, but most importantly, including the government. Because if we're going to hand a monopoly of this power to the government then becomes an unchecked force, which can be a real problem. So libertarians frequently have the right instinct that we've got to keep that thing as small as possible. We've got to keep the check on it. The government is the one thing where there are zero other checks and balances other than itself. And so the people become like this other column that have to stand up against that thing becoming tyrannical, right? But it's very easy to slip into this mentality from there. This is what you were kind of talking about, where now it's like, oh, the source of every problem in the world is government. And a lot of libertarians flip into that situation, which is not true. There are other sources of problems in the world. And government, as bad as it is at providing solutions, because its incentives are mostly wrong in most of the situations, most of the time, is not a universal, all-controlling evil. It's this kind of necessary evil, which is how the founders saw it. And this is sort of the libertarian view, but it's easy to slip into this, government is the problem, so we're just going to be critical of government all the time mentality, which is a critical theory. And now we're exposing the power structures, especially the government power structures. So anything that fights the man is good mentality. Christians, you mentioned Christians, the same thing is there, right? But the criticism then becomes of the world. Everything's worldly versus the spiritual mentality. So it's like a critical theory of the world, which in some sense, but that is an old name. That's called Gnosticism. Those are the old Gnostic heresies reinvented. And so there's a pretty deep connection there. Maybe it's that there's a spiritual misunderstanding. Maybe there's a government misunderstanding. Maybe it's that there's a class warfare misunderstanding. But you have the same kind of mentality that there's some power thing that's causing all the problems in the world, and the only thing we can do as the little dirt people is criticize that thing. That's what Horkheimer said the critical theory was about. He said we cannot describe a better world on the terms of the existing world, but we can criticize those elements of the existing world that we wish to change. So it's easy to fall into that, to lose sight, and it is common. So you will see it with libertarians. Siding with this a lot of the times. You'll see it with Christians sometimes siding, because so much of this stuff is worldly. But the trick is, if you want to put it like the devil's trick here, is that in fact, critical theory is so obsessed with power, and in fact that's worldly power, that's what this thing actually becomes about, is about establishing a new regime in which the people who believe that they're enlightened to how the world works get to have all the power over everybody else. And so then there's no liberty, there's no freedom. So the libertarians and the Christians who fall into this have been bamboozled. They've really lost the plot, even though the instincts that brought them there are not the wrong instincts in many cases. We should aspire to spiritual things over worldly satisfaction. We should aspire to a small and limited checked and balanced government such that, it doesn't become tyrannical. And trample people's individual liberties. It's absolutely the right instincts, but that's the nature of this kind of a parasitic conspiracy theory mindset, is to turn it to something wicked by kind of over universalizing the thing. It's like stepping out of reality into idealism about the thing that you're dealing with.
Can we get a little bit, I want to get a little bit of clarity on this, because it seems like, I don't think you'd be saying that simply because a libertarian would criticize government in a whole array of things, that means they're practicing critical government theory.
No, absolutely not.
What kinds of, I guess I just want to know, what kinds of things qualify here? Because, from our perspective, Jacob and I share a kind of mostly anarchist direction kind of thing. Hey, if we could abolish it, we think that everything that could be done, that is done by the state, can be done voluntarily. Now, we may not get there tomorrow. In fact, we probably won't, because people are still impulsive to do that thing. But, if you want something to be done by government, it can probably be done voluntarily. Leaving that aside, that's just giving you our prior, so we're having this conversation.
Sure.
the impulse to look at something happening in the world, I can understand what you mean by saying, well, and I've even been accused of this, of like, well, you just see the government as causing every problem. And I'm like, well, no, not entirely, because but there is a sense in which when you're critiquing somebody who has been, I'll use your word a moment ago, bamboozled into believing that taxes are what we do to live in a civilized society, and all it's doing is going to fund more wars. That to me is something worthy of critique, as opposed to just sort of like the government's everywhere and it's behind everything, and like that mindset. I mean, I know we're all libertarians can be prone to that sort of conspiracy thinking. But where do you draw that line in your mind of like when you see somebody, let's say a libertarian on Twitter, or just you're conversing people like us, and you can be totally frank here. You're welcome to be frank about this, because I know you are. Where do you draw that line when we're advocating
somebody else?
Yeah, I know. I wasn't making that sort of pun. I'm sorry. I know you are a person who is frank. I know your name's not Frank.
Stop calling me Shirley.
I don't know. Did my question get across?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you actually answered the question for me. I don't disagree with you about where the line is. When the government becomes a conspiracy theory, that's where the line is drawn, right?
Yeah, but what does that look like, though?
Well, you even said it. It's like everything comes down to the government being if you can draw a line, like the conspiracy theory guy with the yarn and the meme, back to the government as the cause of every problem, then you probably are doing a critical government theory, right? If you can't find any legitimate function for government whatsoever, you might be, I didn't say you might be doing a critical government theory. That's not the same, by the way, as saying that it's possible for everything to be done voluntarily without the need for government. Is kind of anarchist position. Anarchists aren't necessarily critical theorists, because they don't always just blame everything on the government. They just have a different vision for what societal organization might look like. But if it's,
good distinction, yeah,
it's almost like people who are walking around and it's like, damn the government, damn the government. It's the government again. The birds are drones or whatever. Damn the government.
Well, that wasn't true. No, but no, is it kind of like, is it kind of like so like we as Christians, to kind of make a comparison here, I believe that the devil is real. I believe there's spiritual warfare, but there's also the meme of like the devil made me do it. It's like, well, hold on. Like there is also personal responsibility here as well, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can even have some sympathy. I was actually on Larry Sharp's show last night, and we were talking about this. I said, listen, partly because I came from this camp, but like I understand where millennials and Zoomers who fall into democratic socialism are coming from, because they instinctively know something's kind of broken in the economic system. Now, I would attribute that to monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, and just a lot of distortions in the economy that I think come from the government. But just because I think the economy is sort of being distorted by government intervention doesn't mean that you are poor. Like, now maybe you'd have to look at the evidence, right? Someone might be poor, right? Because maybe they were like trying really hard as an entrepreneur, and then government came in and like screwed them over. But it's also possible that maybe you're poor because you just made bad choices, right? So you have to at least be open-minded. And I think I would agree with you that like it's probably hard to know the exact line. But if it's always, it's just like if someone said, always the devil made me do it, it's always the government's fault, then that's at least a little suspicious.
Yeah, if you're blaming the government the way the critical race theorists blame white people, you're probably a critical theorist. It's like a kind of an acid test, right? It's like going hiking does not have a whiteness problem, because white people hike at a higher rate than black people on average, right?
I was wondering where you were going as you were saying that. Yeah.
This does not alienate black people from being able to go hike. And if they do, that's like their own literal mental disorder. And so like literally black people can go hiking. I don't think anybody's going to be like, hey, black person, get off the trail. You're black. Like this isn't how things work ever anywhere. And it's not like outside is not a white space. But if you start to do kind of the same thing where like somehow everything is the fault of the government, like you're probably doing a critical theory, which isn't to say it's the same thing. You could make the argument, hey, look, the government's doing X, it could be done better by the private sector, and here's why. That's not a critical theory.
What about when libertarians and more sophisticated ones that have economics degrees will explain how, like Jacob mentioned, the Federal Reserve is influencing foreign policy, or the Federal Reserve is, like the creation of such an institution is creating something like systemic evil. Like Christians don't like that term. A lot of Christians don't like that term, but I'm like, no, I have a good example. It's called the Federal Reserve. At least that's my. I mean that. If you want to you could play the game of like, well, if you want to talk about systemic racism, then why are we talking about minimum wage, abolishing the minimum wage and abolishing the Federal Reserve? Because when I'm talking to leftists who think about this kind of thing, and they're it's just like, oh no, we need those things. I'm like, no, those are started for that exact reason.
That's funny. No, there are. I don't know. So systemic means something more specific in this kind of conspiracy theory land that is critical theory.
Okay.
But that this is actually like institutional and structural to the system is a fundamentally fine way to talk about it. Like, look, our entire economic system is organized around these following things, and here are the consequences of those things.
Yeah.
That's not a critical theory. You're explaining how things work, and you can levy a critique outside of a critical theory. A critical theory means you don't see any better way, but you're going to complain about the parts that are not adequate. So since you have something that does work as a better way, you're not just engaging in tearing down. Your goal may be to bring the Federal Reserve as an organization down and to not replace it with something else. There's no onus on having to replace something, but you're not just tearing down just to tear down. You're tearing down because you think that it's actually a problem that needs to be taken out of the equation. And this is unlike systemic racism, right? We don't all mindlessly participate in the Federal Reserve, right? We might be unaware of how it operates and affects us in the economy, but we're not all like mindlessly participating in some, economic oppression that, we don't even recognize and can't possibly understand without having a race guru to come in and tell us how it works.
The whole idea of, basically what you're just describing was the mode of deconstruction, just not having an alternative, just being in that deconstruction mode. So let me back up my story just a moment for you and ask you something about postmodernism, because I went to seminary, dang it, this was 20 years ago. Holy cow. Guess I'm getting old. I went to started seminary about 20 years ago. And in Christian circles, I don't know if you were paying attention back then as far in what was going on in Christian circles, but the term missional was very important. Postmodernism was hitting the common parlance a little bit more. And so we were talking about people who were questioning absolute truth and all of this kind of stuff. And there was a period of time where I personally went through a kind of Christian deconstruction phase. And you've probably heard of Christians who've done this, of course. It wasn't called that at the time. We didn't call it that. But it happened for me in a way that led me to seminary. And the seminary was very solid, kind of reformed leaning institution. But it was very friendly to some of the ideas that were coming alive in kind of what we would now see as the Christian left, where liberation theology was more acceptable, more tolerated. We would read James Cone. We would read, I don't think we read Paulo Freire, if that's how you pronounce his last name. I don't think we read anything from him, but I'm pretty sure that the stuff we did read from him. So that was the milieu that I was in seminary. And at that time, I was not a libertarian. I was more from the right. And for me, this was a idea of, Moses, God liberated the Egyptians, and God was, wants to liberate. And this word liberate, I didn't personally connect more with liberation theology as such, as I've come to understand it mostly through you. And I just thought of that as, well, of course, we're all about liberation. Like, we're all about freedom from sin. We're all about freedom from the ultimate consequences from sin. Like, that's part of what the gospel is. And we should be in favor of, lifting up the poor and doing some of those things. And this whole social, the whole social gospel kind of thought. Mm-hmm. And what this leads me to is this idea that postmodernism, I came to understand it with that whole, I forget who defined it, the incredulity toward meta narratives, right? That sort of like overarching. And I've heard you make comments. What's that?
That's Jean-Francois Lyotard.
Yes. I've heard you make remarks that were not disparaging of postmodernity or postmodernism in its kind of basic core tenets, but you don't really go into detail anytime I've ever heard you mention it. So I've been wanting to ask you, is there something fundamental to the postmodern mindset that you don't have a whole lot of problems with, and if not, maybe you do at this point, but where are you with that? Because to me, that's part of the fundamental critique in my mind of being able to look at something and say, there's something going on here. Like deconstruction is okay as long as it's not step one and there's only one step, right? Like there has to be more to it.
I'm pretty cold on postmodernism and deconstruction now. I might have been more warm to it a little bit a few years ago, but I've grown colder over time.
Okay.
So I can use maybe the example of Exodus as a bridge here that might bring some understanding, but I don't want it to sound like I'm just ranting about theology. But it's really clear if you read, Exodus, then going into Deuteronomy, that God didn't want to just liberate the Israelites. That was not the goal. He wanted to bring them to the point to where they were free to choose righteousness or not, because he gives them the 10 commandments, then he gives them the 613 mitzvahs or whatever it's called, the laws. And the deal is you choose righteousness or you don't. And if you do, I'll keep, good on my end of the covenant and things are going to be good for you. And if you don't, then, woe is coming your way. And so you have this kind of which it did repeatedly. That's the whole Old Testament is basically the Jews deciding they can wing it and God fixing that for them in their thinking.
We're going to use that here in about 10 minutes, James, that phrase.
Yeah. So at any rate, the point wasn't to liberate them. The point was to take them out of bondage in which they did not have the opportunity to adequately express the fullness of their lives and choose righteousness or not, and to live in accordance with the covenant that he was offering. So there's something more there. That's what I really wanted to get to. There's something more to the story than merely, okay, there are illegitimate power structures that we should ask questions about. And so, you're kind of saying the deconstructive process opens the door to ask those questions. And as long as there's another step that's maybe more constructive on the other side, maybe a deconstructive, reconstructive project, then maybe that's okay. I don't think of it that way anymore. I think of it because I become very concerned about, and not that I'm a big fan of Pat Deneen, but Patrick Deneen writes pretty thoroughly about this idea of liberals, which it's really leftists that he's conflating, trying to have a self-defined self. They wish to liberate themselves from the shackles of tradition, of family, of nation, and even of reality, to define themselves however they will. And the deconstructive project is that project. And the slope is actually somewhat slippery once it gets kind of socially instituted. It's not necessarily slippery when you're on your own as an individual. You don't have any social pressures to keep going. But you see with the queer theory movement, what happens if you don't? The second you say, this is where I want to stop, somebody comes along and deconstructs you there and says, this is actually why you're still a bigot. And now you've got this whole slippery slope into utter, anarchy, not in the sense of not liking the government, but in the sense of having no boundaries, no structure, whatever. And so I think that is the encapsulation of the postmodern project. Okay. And I'm cold to that. What I do believe is that reality exists, and part of reality is the moral framework. And if it's scripture that hands us that, that's fine. If it's some evolutionary byproduct of being human, it doesn't matter for my argument where it comes from. But there is some objective set of moral boundaries for human beings that maybe isn't totally unitary, but it probably is something close to unitary. That there are better and worse ways to live, better and worse ways to organize society. Some stuff's probably arbitrary. It doesn't really matter if you wear red pants or blue pants in your society, probably at all. But you could have a moral rule that says red pants are good and blue pants are bad, and it's pretty arbitrary. But at any rate, my thinking is that we have a reality that we can discover, and that if we want to do well, we have to live in accordance with that. That's discovering real truth. That's discovering moral truth. I think that tradition, which is one of the things Deneen would be worried about postmodernism deconstructing, rightly concerned. I think that tradition becomes, it's like the Chesterton's fence thing. It's like it's a bunch of guardrails for how you should probably organize society, except you don't always know why you're supposed to organize society that way. And I think that some of that, because some traditions are either dated or they are in fact arbitrary, there should be space. And I think this is what you're asking about. There should be space to question.
Yeah.
But that question has to be guided by the fact that reality still exists, including moral reality and social reality, and that everything's not up for grabs. So the deconstructive project misses the ultimate point. And again, the Exodus, to use it as a metaphor,
Sure,
the Exodus to Leviticus story kind of tells that, because God doesn't just free them and let them wander the desert. He's like, here's a whole bunch of freaking rules.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. No, I think that's a really good analogy to kind of spell out the project of genuine critique or genuine liberation in this case. The thing that I kind of latched onto with about postmodernism had to do more with language, and this we could spend here for another hour if we wanted, but I did want to see what you thought of this, where I've often noticed that because the postmoderns effectively said, well, language is just a power game. And I can see how that is sometimes true, if not a lot true. And instead of sort of making, kind of adopting to a world where that's actually not how language games work, they were just like, well, language is power game, so we need to pursue power. And then, of course, you see this sort of attitude with the woke right. Is that in your mind sort of what happened with all of this? I mean, it seems to me that with critical theory, that's what happened.
Yeah, it's part of it. Like, critical theory had its limits as far as to what it could accomplish. It needed the postmodern tool because it needed to be able to step into the world where all language is rhetoric, is one way to phrase that. So therefore, all language becomes persuasion and power games.
You can create the world you think ought to exist because language is what does that.
Right, and which is a massive shift in your ontology. You've now actually metaphysically shifted into a completely different universe where now you're the creator, which is pretty heretical and dangerous. But the idea, their idea, John Searle tore them apart on this. John Searle said, no, language is not all about power. You can extract power, you can exert power, etc., by using language, of course. But language is about creating shared intentionality from one mind to the other. For me to have an idea, and I want you to share that idea. So I use words as imperfect symbols.
Yeah, theory of mind. Yeah.
Correct. And I communicate those, and then you ask back, is this what you meant? Or you proceed, and I say, holy crap, you got it wrong, or whatever. Or yeah, you got it right. Like, I read an article today. How often does this happen? I read something in the Wall Street Journal this morning, and I was like, did I write this? Holy cow. I actually agree completely with something I read in the press. Holy crap. It was about this whole Tucker Carlson heritage blow up with Nick Fuentes and all that. So I was like, I could have wrote this. Wow. Okay. That happens sometimes. So this guy and I have the same idea in all likelihood. But a lot of times I, get interviewed by somebody and then they go write something. I talk to them for an hour and a half and it's very clear they understood like nothing that I actually said. Very complicated. But anyway, the point is for language to be able to communicate ideas, and power can be done through that. But the postmodernists basically believe that all of language no longer refers to points in reality, but rather refers to other points in language. That's Derrida's contention. And that means that all of the understanding and use of language becomes power or a power game. We actually, by the way, almost named cynical theories instead of cynical theories, where we took critical theory and crossed out. And we were going to do the same trick. We were going to call it power games, but we were going to write like Wittgenstein with language games and cross out language, put power. We almost titled the book Power Games instead. I think cynical theories was the better choice, but we bobbled back and forth between the same trick with two different things. But that's ultimately what's happening is they did shift this. What they came up with, a lot of people don't understand this. Maybe you guys will appreciate it. What the postmodernists did, they claimed they were post-Marxist, that Marxism failed, and they're not Marxist anymore, and we're not like card-carrying communists, not anymore. They probably burned it with their bra or whatever, Michel Foucault and his bra burning. But he goes, these guys created a Marxist theory of meaning-making. The powers that be get to decide what the language means and what the symbols mean.
Yeah.
And we all have to play in their sandbox. But what John Searle actually came along and said was, no, that's not how this works. It doesn't really matter what the language is. It could be Hebrew, it could be Arabic, it could be Spanish, it could be whatever. It doesn't matter if it's like English in the 1910s or English in the 2010s where the slang is completely different. We don't know what 6-7 means. In fact, it doesn't mean anything. And
Yet.
But it does, but it doesn't, but it does, but it doesn't. It's a postmodern phenomenon in language, but it doesn't matter, because the whole point is just to create this shared intention between different people who are in communication with one another. And when it succeeds, it actually works. And when it doesn't succeed, it's called a miscommunication, and we don't have to write more into it. And his point was, though, it doesn't matter what the linguistic and symbolic symbols are that you use to communicate, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what they are. What matters is their actual content in terms of what those words correspond to. And that Derrida is completely wrong. Words do not all point to other words. It's just that they describe, we have these conventions in language that we're going to use the word tree to describe a tree, that we're going to use the word car to describe a car, but it still points to a thing in reality that you can actually talk about, or to an abstract concept that two different people can have the same understanding of.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's really helpful, I think. And no, I appreciate that clarification, and just kind of, remark about
I'm not a big geek
there
on Searle, but I do recommend, if you're interested, reading John Searle on this. He's anything he wrote about Derrida and language is just fantastic.
Like Doug said, we could do a lot on this. We've actually had, going back to like Freedom Fest a couple of years ago, I think we had like an hour and a half conversation, like, do words have meaning or do words have usage? And got into big rabbit holes there.
Hey everyone, it's Doug from LCI. As you may know, the team at Podsworth Media has worked with us for a long time, producing our content for most of the Christians for Liberty network. A big part of that over the past couple of years has been using the Podsworth app to make our audio sound clean, level, and professional, even when the raw recordings were super sketchy, like this one you're listening to right now. Believe it or not, this recording was that bad before I ran it through the Podsworth app, and you can hear the full before and after demo yourself at podsworth.com. The app recently got a huge update, and it's now better than ever. So good, in fact, that it can take almost any atrocious voice recording and make it sound great. Here's how it works. It removes background noise, cuts down on plosives, fixes clipping when your gain is too high, removes clicks and pops, reduces reverb, improves tone, and levels out the dialogue so that you don't get any crazy volume jumps. Everybody hates that in a podcast. Using it is super simple. You just go to podsworth.com and click Get Started, drag and drop the audio files, open them right up from your phone's browser, customize your settings however you want, but honestly, the default works great for most settings. And here's a really cool thing. If you enter code LCI50, you'll get 50% off your first order. No account needed, just your email and payment. You'll get a download link in your inbox with cleaned up files. It's perfect for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, you name it. If your recording sounds rough, the Podsworth app can make it not only sound listenable, but professional. And remember, when you use code LCI50, you get half off your first order, and you'll also be supporting the work here at LCI.
But I wanted to slightly pivot to talk about, so like what was partly the genesis of us getting together was after the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death, you wrote this long piece on X, which really was impactful to me. It was, and I might have the order wrong, it was like catharsis versus civilization, or might have
No, that's right. Yeah.
And you were getting at something that I had already started to see a little bit, but I hadn't quite completely put my finger on it yet, which is, and just to, again, I think I've given a little bit of the backstory. I was raised right, then went pretty hard left. I was like a Bernie bro, a Young Turks kind of Occupy Wall Street, progressive left guy. But then after Trump, and when the left decided to stop caring about foreign policy and economics, even though they were wrong on economics, and to just fully go woke, that made me politically homeless. I spent a little bit of time on the right before I found libertarianism. But I've noticed, and I was like hesitant at first when you and others started using that phrase woke right, because like as someone who like came from the left and left it because of the woke insanity, I just didn't see it. Or if I even saw little things, I thought, well, that's just like these really fringe radicals that no one takes seriously. I didn't think that there was like a major pattern or problem there. But then ever since October 7th. And we probably won't get too much into this, but you and I have had some back and forths online because we disagree a little bit on the maybe foreign policy particulars there of the role of America's government, the role of Israel's government, and all this. But I did start to notice, it became undeniable as time went on, that okay, there's definitely some people who are not just criticizing Israel's government, who are actually anti-Semitic. I also started to notice that Christian nationalists were starting to spend a lot more time in the Bailey and less time in the Mott, to invoke that logical fallacy there. And then your piece there, civilization versus catharsis, I think really sort of highlighted this overarching problem of wokeness that now seems to be coming more alive on the right and even in libertarian circles. And I just find it very frustrating, very concerning, because there just seem to be that there are more people who are not just saying like, let's have conversations about what are the, are there policies that are creating these second, third order consequences, like we talked about earlier. We need to look at that. It is just this doubling down on us versus them. There is this, evil cabal that's trying to destroy. From the left, it was, it's whiteness trying to kill us, and now it seems the right is inverting that, and it's saying the world is trying to kill whiteness. Like it's almost like they just kind of picked up. It's like the left played down to sat down to play a stupid game they made up, and now the right's saying, sure, let's let's sit down and play the stupid game. So I'm very concerned about that, and I'm kind of not sure how you see like where we're at right now. Like, I want to ask this also, like in terms of Trump in his second term, is Trump's administration and him winning, has this been something that has helped the right to move away from this stuff, or is it maybe pushing it more towards it, or is it a mixed bag? Because I honestly feel like I feel like it's a mixed bag. I see some of Trump's rhetoric and some of the people in his orbit who are against this stuff, but then sometimes it seems like they're perhaps, intentionally or unintentionally, knowingly or unknowingly, feeding into this stuff more, and it's concerning.
I do see the mixed bag. I may have a slightly different. It's funny, all this stuff we just talked about conspiracies. I may have a slightly different perspective on what's going on with this rise on the right. I actually do think it's coordinated. I don't think it's becoming organic. But I do think it's largely an operation that's being levied against the American people, primarily by foreign enemies. That is also being, like, the conduit to it is through domestic actors who, for whatever reasons, sometimes knowingly, I'd say, and sometimes not knowingly, have taken up with this. Propaganda can get people on board unknowingly. We all know that there are these very manipulative tactics now. I actually just read a name for it the other day, and I don't remember what it was. So I'm bummed out. Then there's even a name for this now, where the bots doing manipulation of your like count and your retweet count and your, get the ratios on X or on social media in general. Like, there's a name for messing with your head by doing that. It has a name now, and I forgot what the name is. But this is like becoming a recognized phenomenon that, a bot farm in Russia, for example, just to pull a country, because we know they have them and they use them, can give you 40,000 likes on some extremist post that you make, and you think, dang, people do like that kind of stuff. And if you're not particularly clear in your principles, or if you're not particularly scrupulous as a person, well, that's cash money in the bank. I got high engagement. That's what people want. That's where things are going. Hey, let's go with the flow. Let's go with the wave. So there's a total huge operation, and I think it's demonstrable operation that's heavily foreign influence to do these kinds of things in our social media space that's deranging people. I think most of this is inorganic. I do think that there are also domestic actors. I don't know what their affiliations are. I don't know if they're intelligence. I don't know if they're Democrats. I don't know if they're grifters. I don't know if they're compromised through foreign arrangements or whatever else. They seem to accuse a lot of people of being on the Israeli dime. I can tell you what, that $7,000 thing is not real, at least not for me. I'm not getting any $7,000. Although when I was in Israel, it was like the running joke. It was every single day, there's your $7,000. We'll get you $7,000 for that. And then it was more like I got a donut. I didn't get $7,000. But at any rate, I'm joking a little bit. But but no.
Wait, are you saying the Israelis were joking about this because they know?
Oh, they think it's the funniest thing in the freaking world. This is like the craziest thing about going to Israel and spending just a little bit of time there, like just in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or whatever, is like you get online as an American and you see all this like all these claims about Israel, and you're like looking around and you're like, this is exactly the opposite of reality. Like it's so fake that it's like hard to believe how fake it is. It's like I had to just stop looking at my social media after a point because it was like, it was so false that it wasn't interesting. I don't know. It wasn't making me mad. It was like, holy crap, Americans are stupid. Like, this is just dumb. It's like if someone, I don't even have an analogy for it. It would literally be like if somebody was talking about like a football bat. It's that confusing when you're there. Then I think this is part of why they're losing the PR war. But they know about $7,000 and they think it's hilarious that anybody would accuse them of this. Just dead ass funny. So anyways, where was I going? I think that the woke right is a mix. I do think from the Trump administration, it's a mixed bag. I think that there are people in there that are in that direction of thinking, and there are people in there that are not in that direction of thinking. I don't think Trump is in that direction of thinking personally. Certainly not on Israel, but he's still a consummate troll, right? So he still steps into some of it, and he's got people around him. I don't know if you know how government actually works in reality, but you have people, but then they have like a wall of people around them, conceptually speaking, not physically, that prevent, like, if you want to get a message to Trump, it's got to get like through a band of handlers who handle other handlers who handle other handlers. That's the president's inner circle. And only you have to clear like 3 or 4 rounds of handlers to get to the inner circle. And one of them might tell Trump. Like, so it's very unclear what messages are getting through, who's are in those, who is in those. The president is an extraordinarily busy job. So just like the volume of material, Trump seems to be vaguely superhuman on this, but the volume of material that you can absorb is somewhat limited. I don't know how much time he's spending on social media. He's on Truth Social, which is not particularly like that good of an antenna, if you want to put it that way. So I don't know what's going on there.
Well said, yeah.
I have heard that the president is aware that this is a problem, and he was not as aware of it until quite recently, and he's not very happy about it. But that's rumors, so I don't know. What I can say is that I agree with your assessment. Like, I'm fine with people making jokes. I wrote an article years ago I got in trouble for with critical race theory stuff, saying I think we should be making racial jokes, but not racist jokes, and that we should be navigating where that line is, right? Because it allows you to navigate the difference. It allows you to have humor. It allows you to break the tension that, like, critical race theory raises the tension across races. Before critical race theory, it's like you and some other guy of another race, you're just hanging out, and like every now and then one of you steps on a landmine you didn't realize, and you like figure out how to paper it over, or you get in a fight, or maybe you don't. Critical race theory comes along, and it's like, I had people calling me and they're like, it's turning me racist. If I'm in a room with a black person, I don't know what I can say, and I'm afraid to say anything. And now I'm thinking that they're going to blow up if I say anything, and I know that's a racist thought, and I don't know what to do. And it's like, so it made it worse, right? So I made an argument for these jokes. So I'm down with jokes and stuff, but you're right. It also works as a mask. Criticism of Israel, and which is fine as a state, obviously, Bibi, it's not a perfect state. It's not a perfect government. It's not a perfect leader. These criticisms are all perfectly fine on the table. In fact, if you go to Israel, you hear them all the time. They criticize their own, just like any other political environment. Bibi is very popular with certain contingents and very unpopular with other contingents. He was very unpopular with the people in the kibbutzes that got destroyed on October 7th, by the way. They didn't like Netanyahu. Okay, so you have it's a whole political animal of its own over there. But you're correct. These things become a mask among the undiscerning, where it's no longer just jokes or foreign policy or domestic policy debates or whatever. There's actually something else boiling under the surface. And for a lot of the last year, of course, a lot of the heat that I got was people thought that I was calling out people making jokes. And maybe there were times where I was a little too sensitive about what I was seeing, or foreign policy debates. Maybe there were times where I was too sensitive. But at the same time, I was seeing the same real stuff that you noticed. And I also understand this dynamic where you have to have the space to have the conversations, make the jokes, to have the debates, etc. And at the same time, you have to also understand how they can be covers. And just like the discussion we had earlier about critical government theory, it's freaking hard to figure out when and where and how to draw the lines. And we obviously don't want, I hope obviously don't want censorship as the guiding tool, right? But at the same time, it's like this no enemies to the right nonsense is also clearly not a good guiding principle. Like, if somebody says something that's literally objectionable for good reasons, or that is, the problem with racism is that it's an exercise of arbitrary power, which is the thing that libertarians are, of course, opposed to. It's in my state constitution here in Tennessee, is the thing that we're literally dedicated to being opposed to. It's the second thing in our constitution for the state, is that we're against the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power. And that's what racism is. It's, I don't like you and exert power for an arbitrary reason, right? It's not a reason that has to do with your character, your competence, your merit, whatever. It has to do with, I just don't like you because of the way you look and, where your people came from or whatever it happens to be. So this is a complicated space to navigate in. But the fact is something real and bad is happening alongside something not bad. And we have to do the not bad thing, but we also have to be discerning enough to draw the line at the bad things and do this kind of all in this weird milieu now where calling anybody out for being bad behavior is cancel culture and therefore off the table, right? Like, no, I get it. Like Mark Levin did call for Tucker Carlson to be canceled, but like kind of nobody else is.
Yeah, I think so. I want to preface this with just my own acknowledgement that I've gotten this wrong, because I started out after October 7th because I'm a Ron Paul non-interventionist libertarian, and just my reading of the history of just the policies at play, I just knew, and listen, like all the caveats, like, October 7th wasn't justified, 1,200 innocent people died that day, and it's horrific, and there's no defense for that, and it's a tragedy, and my heart goes out for the people who lost loved ones that day, or who had people kidnapped that hopefully they maybe recently just came back or didn't. That's all horrible. I also just knew that it was going to lead to some to call for more war and interventionism and what I thought was going to be the same way I would say that we as America after 9/11, we overextended in our reaction and created a lot of just unnecessary, not just damage in the Middle East, but also I think that had repercussions for us at home, for our domestic security and our economy. It's like I was there, but I did not, until recently, do a good enough job of recognizing what you're saying, that there are some people using this as a cover. So I want to preface this by saying that I've gotten this wrong. Do you think that perhaps you've gotten this wrong at times in terms, because I feel I think you and I have had taken even shots at each other a little bit, kind of just the way it goes on X. People will respond and snark and whatnot, but it feels like you're saying something here that I haven't seen you really say elsewhere, which is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is room to have the conversation and debate about the historical roots, the geopolitical consequences of certain policies for the U.S. government, for the Israeli government, to even say hey, I don't think Israel's war in Gaza was carried out the right way. Even if I agree that they should have responded and done something about Hamas. So, and this ties into what you were saying about is this rise of the woke right organic, or is it something being funded by foreign entities? I know I'm rambling here, but I'll try to land this here as quick as I can, because it's connected. That I think that's possible. I mean, we certainly know that there are also countries and governments and entities, terrorist organizations. I mean, everyone's spending money and doing things to try to do all sorts of things over the internet. So I'm not going to discount that. But do you see any room for I knew about you and I've read some of your stuff, but I was more, and you guys were very connected, had the same arguments. I was more of a Jordan Peterson guy in terms of learning about, things like critical theory and postmodernism and cultural Marxism and things like that. And Jordan Peterson, and you probably were too, maybe, seemed to be for years, going all the way back to 2017, 2018, were warning that, hey, all this critical theory stuff, all this grievance-based stuff, that this is going to cause radicalization on the right, that it's going to make people racist, it's going to make people anti-Semitic. And I think that is more what we're seeing. And then I think insofar as I think you at times and other people have not allowed for conversations about foreign policy and government policy and, the history of Israel to happen. And they've kind of suppressed that and just automatically assumed the worst about people when they go down those lanes. I think that's also had a detrimental effect in pushing people more towards radicalization and less towards dialogue that's illuminating and that leads to truth and leads to like trying to find peaceful ways out of all of this. 'Cause, I mean, that's like my value as a libertarian is like I'm pro-peace. I don't want to see, Palestinian children dead. I don't want to see Israeli children dead. And I don't want to see racial tensions rise here in America, because that leads to like what should make us here in the West better than those in the other parts of the world is that we should not have all this like ethnic divide and warring and whatnot. But I worry that our country is heading on a collision course towards that kind of outcome. So I know I threw a lot at you there, but it's connected and it's hard to kind of ask it piecemeal.
Woke right and Israel all in one question.
I mean, there's a million things that could be said. I don't know if now's the moment to, offer what I learned, at least of the Israeli perspective on these issues, because you kind of asked a meta question about it. But the meta question's easy to answer. Of course, there has to be room for these debates. It's not even that there has to be room for these debates. These debates are necessary. These debates are the exact debates that are taking place in Israel as well. Within their own polity, within their own government, within their own country. So, of course, these questions have to be on the table. And so I get this accusation a lot that I shut down debate. But in reality, there are two things happening. Number one is I don't debate on Twitter. I just don't do it ever. I stopped doing it in like 2015 because it's just a huge waste of time. So people come thinking they're going to get a debate with me, and what they get is called a name because I don't want to do it, because I get 30,000 notifications on Twitter a day on average, and I just don't have time. And most of it, not all of it, but most of it is in bad faith. And I watched like my friend Helen drive herself like kind of literally insane trying to like debate and argue with every single person who came looking like they're in good faith, many of whom obviously weren't, but some of whom were. And it just kind of went in circles. And it's like, it's not the medium. It's absolutely not the medium for that behavior. And I understand that other people don't know that I've understood, to come to this conclusion and act this way. So I just look like a jackass. But the fact is, I don't have time to care about that either.
Bios are good for that, James.
They only let you have like 170 or 140 characters in your bio.
What? I'm going to send you a clip of this video and you can just put that as your like pinned tweet.
No, I have to advertise my own website. It's like a rule in my company. I have to advertise my own website.
No, I get it.
I want to ask you what newdiscourses.com. There's your clip. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
No, so I'm teasing, but the fact is that like calling somebody a name or blocking somebody doesn't shut down debate. It just shuts me out of the debate. I'm just kind of, if I block you, I'm just removing myself. Because I block when I don't want to hear it anymore. It's like I said, 30,000 notifications a day. A lot of people, you can't have what I'm about to say. You can't have this conversation without sounding like an elitist jackass. When you have a big account, life is very different. Life is very, very, very different. I could write an etiquette guide for people for approaching a big account. But what it boils down to is we get so much stuff that our options are don't engage at all, or kind of be a bad actor.
No, I totally get it. I mean, like
you kind of don't have other options.
When I jumped from 1,000 to 13,000, that was like, oh wow, this is crazy, and I can't imagine you're 10 times or 20 times higher than that. So I'm
at like 545 right now, so it's like insane.
What do you prefer?
A lot of people are not happy with me, so I get like my incoming is like 1 million people a month, probably, literally, maybe a year, using words at me that I'm not allowed to say on your show because it's a nice family show, right? And you can pick the words that you want. I get all of them, right? I see pictures, drawings of myself doing awful things. I'm going to be very polite and not say what they are.
Yeah.
With members of the Israeli government sent to me every single day. I see pictures of my family members photoshopped to be like brutally murdered and stuff, like a lot. So it's messed up. So what that also does for somebody with a large controversial account is it makes you extremely impatient to anything that disagrees with you. So there's a lot of friendly fire. There's a lot of friendly blocking. In DM, I think you found that we've had a slightly different relationship.
Yes.
Because it's not that, it's not the arena, right? So that is an artifact of a medium, and a lot of people don't understand that that's the situation. And anyway, but I'm not shutting down debate. The debates are necessary. So let's use the bad word anti-Semitism. Like, what does anti-Semitism mean if you actually look it up and discuss what it means? It actually means that part of what it actually means is that you want to have these debates, let's say, about Israel, but you hold them to a standard that no other country's ever held to, right? So that there's a singular standard held out that Israel has to meet. And I'll tell you right now, Israelis feel this. Like, they're like, how much better can we do given that we have terrorists coming across our border all the time? And then you can go back and back and back. It's Hatfields and McCoys, like, who started it, who did what? The answer, PS, is the British, probably in all regards.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah, the answer is probably the British in all regards. But the fact is, like, their perspective on like October 6th or October 7th is like, the reason that happened was because they made the mistake of believing that they could trust a Palestinian Authority to govern their own affairs touching their border. And then after however many 1,500 of their citizens get murdered and taken hostage in a day, or in a week actually, but a lot on that single day, they decided no more. We made a mistake in the 1960s that has been plaguing us ever since, and we're going to do something about it, because we can't have something like Hamas with its charter that says openly that they intend to kill every Jew living under their own autonomous government, literally that close to us, because obviously they can occasionally trick us and then do mass death. So this is their perspective on it. And after you go there, it's kind of hard not to sympathize with it, but I understand why there's this back and forth through the historical contingency. The question becomes are you holding them to, and I'm not saying you guys individually, but is the person in the debate holding them to an unreasonable standard they wouldn't hold any other country to? Like, if you had it's a bad analogy because of the size of our countries, but if you had, like, the Mexican cartels come across and massacre a bunch of Texans, like, what do you think the U.S. government's response would be? What do you think the U.S. population's response would be, and what they would desire? And then the question is, do we go back and try to litigate and say that, well, the U.S. in the Spanish-American War stole taxes from Mexico, so they have this longstanding grievance, blah, 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 blah. Like, if you start holding the United States to a standard that you wouldn't hold, some other country to, then you got a problem. But if you would say, hey, if a bunch of Mexican cartel guys came across and killed, 5,000 Texans and massacred them or whatever, and so the U.S. should respond to that, but then you say, like, Israel shouldn't respond, then that's a double standard is what people are seeing. And that's frustrating for people.
No, I think it's, like, I've always said Israel should respond, but just like I would say America should have responded to 9/11, I just think that there could be conversations about, like, and there's good and bad versions of that conversation, right? Like, there's a good conversation that says, hey, what was the American foreign policy in the 80s and 90s that probably led to some grievances where a lot of Arabs started to hate America and be willing to strap bombs on their chest and be radicalized into, Islamicism. And then what should our response be now? But yeah, if someone says, well, you did bad things in the past, so just let your people die, that's obviously a bad faith response.
That's a
I don't think that was the, like, from libertarians at least, like, I don't think that was our response in terms of what we were saying Israel could do. But
there's another big misconception here, just to share the idea that I didn't know till I went to Israel last week, which is, this idea of American interventionism through Israel. Like, we can talk about the foreign aid and the military strategic partnership, which involves the ability, frankly, for the Israelis to buy arms from the United States that are earmarked to it. Joe Biden actually cheated them really badly during the October 7th subsequent war, because they had purchased these arms, and then Joe Biden's administration just decided not to deliver them, even though they were paid for, right? So there were things, but that's not the point. I didn't know this.
Probably went to Ukraine.
Yeah, probably. Since 1967, with the 6 Days War, which is like when the Naksa occurred. It's like not the Nakba, that's earlier, that's 48. But the Naksa is when the Arabs lost the 6-day war. The Jordanians, I think, were the ones that lost it primarily. But anyway, they lost. Ever since 1967, what the Israelis' predominant belief is, and I didn't meet it, not that I met every Israeli, but I didn't meet a single Israeli that thinks otherwise while I was over there, is that they do not want foreign countries helping them with their security beyond like buy arms or share intelligence. They do not want to be in any way whatsoever dependent upon a foreign country. There will never, ever be a request from Israel, short of like an Armageddon war where it's unignorable, for American troops on the ground, for an American aircraft to do something more than a technical problem, which is what the B-2s did in Iran, is they solved a technical problem. And I was told straight up by people standing there to know, we would have figured out how to get rid of the nuclear sites, but those bunker busters made it a lot faster and a lot easier. So America solved a technical problem for Israel in fighting its battle there, but they don't want American boots. They don't want European boots. They don't want British boots. They don't want Australian boots. They believe that if they become dependent for their security on somebody else, after 3,000 years of history of this, they could be betrayed at the moment of their need. So they have literally zero interest. And this is a huge misconception. This isn't something I've gotten a big argument about or whatever, but it's a huge misconception that Israel is going to pull us into some kind of a war in the Middle East, unless what had happened is that the Israeli operation caused, a mass scale war to break out that actually ended up impinging on American, say, bases or troops that are stationed there, in which case America would be responding to the incursion against its own bases and troops, not at the request of Israel. They are, from like members of the Knesset down to like political strategists to the guy serving falafel, they all think this. Like, Israel will be responsible for Israel's security forever. We love you, America, and they do, by the way, they do love America, but we don't trust you one damn bit. To safeguard our security, that's on us. The conservatives that I was with want the foreign aid to stop, not just because of the PR. They want Israel to stand on its own two legs completely. So there's this internal debate there that's not getting kind of through to Americans either. But this idea that American boots are like that Israel's going to ask for American boots on the ground for one of Israel's wars, whatever you think about how Israel conducts its wars, whether it's with Hezbollah, whether it's in Jordan, whether it's down in Syria, whether something else comes up, down in Gaza, which is the Palestinian Authority, there's not really I don't think there'd really be a war in Judea Samaria because there's like kind of nothing there. Everything there is on the other side of the Jordan River. It's this kind of like hilly, mountainous desert area with not that much going on inside of it. But for now anyway. But for the idea that they would invite American boots on the ground to do anything is just as far from their mind as possible, because they think if they're outsourcing their security, then they're vulnerable in a way that after 1967, whatever you think of how that war went, they don't trust other countries for their security. And it was a shock to me. I didn't know that till I went over there. And like I said, this wasn't an opinion that I heard from a couple guys. This is like what everybody, to a person, not knowing other people had said it, what everybody said.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I mean, just with the limited time we have left, because there could be like a 2-hour back and forth on just all these different like specific points of policy and
easily
whatnot.
20-hour. Like, yeah, just go back and forth forever about this stuff.
Right. Exactly. So I do want to make it a bit more meta here, because we're talking about how we evaluate governments. You said it's anti-Semitic if you hold Israel to a standard you don't hold any other nation. And
that's just the definition, by the way. That is literally, if you look up the definition, one of the parts of the definition.
Sure. I think that I'm going to connect this to something like I've noticed a tendency on the woke right and Christian nationalists especially, that they want to defend Western values, right? Like Western culture. They say, and that's like, and they connect that, of course, obviously, usually to white European culture or white European heritage or whatnot. But even some who aren't, Christian nationalists, like I think even like you would say that, like, even if they're distorting that idea, they say, well, the West is best, right? And that we need to be careful about like radical Islam. We got to be careful about even things like immigration, because the West is special and we have to protect that. And we are positive towards Israel insofar as they are part of this Western tradition that just happen to exist in the Middle East. And there's parts of that narrative that I kind of agree with, that I think are maybe directionally correct. But I think that, I would just say, just like, again, big picture here, I'm generally of the mindset that I think that Western culture and civilization is best. But I see a danger where oftentimes, because we have enemies in the world, we're saying because they don't play by our standards, we can't live up to our own values. Like, I think that Israel and America, we should judge what we do, what our governments do, off of our superior standards and beliefs about morality and justice and proportionality. And insofar as people say, well, that's not, practical for whatever reason, I think that that falls into the same trap that I see people on the Christian nationalist woke right doing, where they say well, listen, politics is just might makes right. And if we don't grab power and rain down, tyranny on our enemies, then, we're going to be ruled by, secularists and leftists and things like that. So does that make sense? Because that's kind of my meta concern here.
I agree with your concern. I think you're in the right position. The thing that I think doesn't really get through here in the U.S. based on, again, 9 days, so it's not a ton. I'm not a native Israeli now, but I didn't make
You're totally right, by the way, not to cut you off, but you're totally right that within Israel, and probably doesn't get talked about enough, but I know Israelis that probably agree with me, 9.9 out of 10 bullet points in a row about my criticisms of their government and foreign policy and whatnot, right? So it's not there's always, and I think libertarians, we're always making this call, don't equate governments with the people, because there's often a big gap there.
So there's this thing that I learned about when I was over there. This has kind of been really since 67, and maybe, which is the 6 Days War, which is kind of one of the big fundamental turning points in their history. But also but it's called the conception. And I said, how do you say that in Hebrew? And they said the conception. They just say it in English. And what it refers to is the misconception, which is, in their opinion, what is the cause of October 6th now. It's pretty widely debated, but it's pretty widely accepted among at least the conservatives over there that the conception is the problem, and that the liberals or the left has the conception. And the conception is that if you're nice enough to the Palestinians, they'll stop trying to kill you. And so the proportionality question with October 7th and the 2-year war that followed, from their perspective, which I'm just expressing to you, I agree with them personally, having seen this, is that they just spent, what is it, to 1967? Do the math. I'm a mathematician, right? That's 58 years. They just spent 58 years operating under the conception that is incorrect, that has now led to a tremendous, first of all, lots of fighting for a long time, and a tremendous day of loss, and under a surprise attack that they didn't see coming. And so basically, they're very frustrated with themselves in the belief that, we could have solved this problem, prevented this kind of thing, but we were too nice. We were too generous to a people who actually want us dead, who are raised to want us dead, and then acted upon this. So then there's this debate within Israel to revise or re-understand the conception of the people that are on the other side of that border and what they represent as a legitimate or serious threat to the Israeli people. So that becomes kind of the basis for their security question and concern. They no longer believe that the people on the other side of that border have any intention of ever adequately deciding to live in peace, that they will always regroup and wage war again. So it's like if we drove the cartel back across the Texan border and the cartel was like, we're going to come back in 2 years. Like, the American government's obviously going to just go make sure there's no cartel there, right? And we're not going to subject Galveston to this over and over and over again. So this is kind of the mentality shift that we've seen in the last couple of years, is that they've had Hamas since 81, which is now a very long time, very clearly saying that they're going to do this, they're going to do this, they're going to do this, acting on it. and that they've been too naive to the political realities of this radical thing. Now, again, you can always play the Hatfield-McCoy game and go backwards and say, well, who caused this and who started that and who did this and who did that? And we can always just blame either the British or the Soviets for virtually everything and kind of get out of the argument at the moment. But the fact is that their view is that they were too naive. And so for them, this isn't a war. It's not about proportionality. It's about neutralizing a persistent threat, right? So they're not saying, okay, you killed this many people, so we're going to answer in kind. It's the threat is still there. The threat is going to manifest again, and we're not going to do it again. We're not going to subject our people to, 1,000 people dying in a day because they got superior intelligence on us one day and broke through our normal defenses, tricking them at 6:30 in the morning on the Sabbath while they're all being very Jewish, except the Nova Festival, which was very secular. But at any rate, so this is a huge topic of debate there too, right? So what I ran into is this shocking emphasis on life. Their attitude was that they do, just like you said, as a libertarian, they want to coexist. They remember a time when Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisted very well for a fairly long time, that the radicalism and the terrorism have increased. What the reasons for that are debatable. They're chalking a lot of it up now to the conception that they misjudged the people who are on this border with them. And again, I'm just sharing the perspective, and sure. I do agree with them, but it's not necessarily for us to argue. This is an argument there in the country between left and right as well. But that they misjudged the enemy that they were dealing with, and they're not going to do that anymore. They're going to neutralize the threat. So what I heard was, if somebody's an Arab, or if somebody's a Muslim, or if they're a Christian, or if they're a Jew, or whatever, of course we want peace, of course we want harmony, of course we want economy, we want to interact like we used to. But if somebody's a terrorist, well, that's a problem, and we will solve it. And that's the attitude. It's actually like the most based thing ever. Like, you hear the guy say that, like, we're going to interact with anybody. And here's kind of and this is just an anecdote, but it's a story. It's a good story. This was impactful for me. We were walking through one of the kibbutzes that got trashed on October 7th. Everybody died, pretty much. I think a few people ran away and a handful of people got saved, but virtually everybody died or got taken hostage in this kibbutz. So we're walking through this kibbutz, and we walk under, there's this one house that's not trashed, or maybe they rebuilt it. I can't remember. Most of them have not been rebuilt. People are scared to live there. But we walk under this banana tree, and it's got like this little bunch of tiny little green bananas that aren't ready, right? And so we had a bunch of guys with us that were like, they're not just tour guides, they're all like IDF. But then we had this like guy who's like security guy with us too, right? So we just had extra security just in case, because we're down in the Gaza envelope. It's not perfect. It's not unsafe, but it's not perfectly safe. So we have the security guy, and of course he's this like badass as it would be, right? And so I point up at the bananas and like, hey, look, bananas or whatever. And the security guy laughs and is like, haha, for the monkeys over in Gaza. And this other guy that was with us is a captain in the IDF. And he immediately cuts this much larger security guy off and was like, no, we don't talk about them like that. They're people. We don't talk about them like that. They're people. They are under their own delusion, and they are a danger, but we only are angry with them to the degree that they're a danger to us. And what I heard from people again and again and again and again, and this is soldiers who, either fought for 2 years in Gaza, or who fought in the war with Lebanon on the northern border with Hezbollah. These guys literally spent their last several years fighting, watching their friends die, etc. Is that what I heard again is just that we're not going to tolerate terrorists, but anything else is fine. We want to get along, but we're not going to put up with terrorists. And so this revision of the conception, right? It's all, how do we save the maximum number of lives that we can? How do we take the minimum number of lives that we can? War is really ugly, but how do we do this and minimize all the damage, and at the same time neutralize a threat that is not going away? It's already been vowed that there's going to be another Israeli-Lebanon war because they were unable to take a mountain that would have given them advantageous position in the future. It's about a mile from where the current border is, north of it. And the reason, by the way, all this rumor that Trump, that Netanyahu pushes Trump around, the reason that they didn't take the further mountain and thus permanently secured the northern border against Hezbollah in January this year was because Trump wanted to win and asked them to stop fighting, even though they were about 3 weeks from being able to secure the line that would have prevented the next war. So they've guaranteed a war for their own people in order to honor Trump's wish for peace, which is sort of the opposite of Israel pushing America around. So it's like really weird when you go there, because the stuff you hear and the stuff you see and the stuff you experience, like none of it matches compared to the stuff that you hear. But I don't think that they act in a way, like I have no impression that they've acted in a way that's irresponsible. I didn't have access, obviously, to intelligence. I wasn't behind enemy lines. I didn't see what they really do. But what I saw was a very consistent, realistic evaluation of what they call the conception, what it costs them to maintain the conception that the Palestinians are just, poor or they have a bad condition. And if we're nice to them, we get them good jobs. Like in this kibbutz that I was in, they gave the Palestinians good jobs. The Palestinians the Gazans overwhelmingly wanted jobs doing delivery and like house cleaning. And so they were paying them there at this kibbutz. It's very left. They're overpaying them in a lot of cases, trying to get them more money, thinking, if we're really nice, it'll be better. And it turns out what these people that were doing delivery driving and house cleaning were doing was primarily gathering intelligence on the kibbutz so that when Hamas came, they knew exactly how to knock walls down to kill everybody in the house. Like, it was totally psychotic. They totally got betrayed. And so the amount of betrayal that happened has caused this revision of the conception, and their agenda is to neutralize a threat. And once the threat... Other than the threat, they have absolutely no beef. You see Arabs and Muslims everywhere, all over the city. They're in shops. People interact. Obviously, with the Jews, it's a little different in a restaurant because they only eat kosher, and a lot of those restaurants are not kosher. Some of them are, but nobody cares. It actually is like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is obviously a Christian site in the middle of Old Jerusalem, is owned by a Palestinian Muslim who's not a radical, and allows everybody to be able to go in and out of it. It's free. You don't have to pay to be able to go see these religious sites for Christians, but it's a Muslim guy who actually owns it. But on the other hand, there are parts of even Jerusalem you can't go to as a Jew because you'll probably get killed in the neighborhood. And they're like, we're kind of done with the threat, right? And I get that. I agree with that. So I don't know. It was eye-opening to go and see. I think these debates are important. I think, as much accurate intelligence or truth this can be brought into the debate is necessary. I'm not claiming that my 9 days there brought it, but I saw things that were shocking. I've never seen a people more dedicated to life in my entire life. Even they're like, if we were going to clink glasses, this isn't moonshine. We're going to clink glasses. It's l'chaim, which means life. To life is what they literally say when they drink with each other. It's pretty amazing, but that's not the culture that you see. Like when we drove in Judea, I don't know if we're in Judea or Samaria, actually. At one point, we drive and we come to this intersection in what's called the West Bank. They don't call it that. It's the West Bank of the Jordan River is what it refers to, but they don't call it that.
Samaria.
We were probably in Samaria. They call it Judea and Samaria. They say the West Bank is this imposed word, but I don't know which one we were in for sure. I think we were in Samaria, but I'm not positive. So we come to this intersection, and there's like the one road, and it's like a T-bone, right? So we could go right or left. But there's this gate, and it's all these red signs. All the signs are in 3 languages: Hebrew, Arabic, and English, in that order. And so there's a sign, and it's basically like, do not enter unless something Palestinian Authority, blah, 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 right? I didn't read the whole sign, so I don't know for sure. And we turned left. We did not turn right toward the gate. And we just had it explained to us, like, look, if you're Jewish and you cross that gate, they're going to kill you, they're going to dismember you, and they're going to play games with the parts of your body in the street and make videos of it and put it on the internet. If you're an American, it's a more diplomatic problem, but you're probably not coming out alive. So we don't go there. And we don't hang out near the gate just in case something goes on. And like, well, what's behind the gate? And they're like, well, a town. So there's just these no-go zones for Jews particularly, but also for non-Muslims kind of more broadly. And I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just like, imagine that's your freaking neighborhood, right? You have places where if you go, you will die, period, because of your religion, and because the people there don't want you there. And no matter how much aid, no matter how much food, no matter how much help, no matter how many jobs you give them, they just use that to gather intelligence on you to kill you en masse later. Like, they see it as a security problem. So they're revising the conception. They're trying to understand where they went wrong from 1967 going forward, trying to revise this, and it looks like they're just trying to conquer the region and drive the Muslim Palestinians out. And their answer to me when I asked them point blank is like, are you guys ethnic cleansing the area? They were like, we are stopping terrorists. That is all we're concerned with, is terrorists. And when all the terrorists are neutralized, everything stops. And they all have their different debates about what they think the war should have looked like and how it should have been conducted and how it could have been different. Some of them think it was done right. Some of them think it was done wrong. Like you'd have in any group of people.
Yeah. Well, you said it's taken like 20 hours to keep talking about this.
Dude, it could go forever too.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well, it has been going forever. I mean, this is it's been going on for what the math you did.
I actually, while I was there, it's super cool. I was given, I hate the word gifted. I will not use that word. I was given a shard of pottery from 70 AD when the Romans destroyed the temple, a piece of Jewish pottery. They had
$7,000 piece of pottery. Sorry, I had
probably is actually a seventh. It's a little piece of junk. No,
this is my James.
Look, silver and gold. This is my Knesset pen they gave me. You can probably, I don't know if you can see, there's Hebrew on it. It probably says, "Eat this and die, American pig." That's a joke from nobody gets this. This is an inside joke in my family. We used to live on the Canadian border at Quebec. And so when we would go across, my dad would take us to McDonald's and they would speak in French. And we were little kids. We didn't know. We were like, what did they say? And my dad would say, "Eat this and die, American pig." And so that's an old joke in my family, 40-year-old joke in my family. Oh, wow. But anyway, I did really go. This really did. They gave me this. This is my $7,000, a pen from the Knesset.
Well, I think that there's a lot of what you said there that I just to kind of because we're kind of out of time, I just wanted to give a closing response to that. Like,
no, that's fine.
I think that it's possible to have, like, not just as individuals, but as a society, a sort of cognitive bias and conflicting ideals happening at once. Because on one hand, I look at the American culture in the 80s, and the 90s, even the 2000s. I don't think that even your most diehard Bush conservative, except for like maybe the Lindsey Grahams, had this like bloodlust to go and kill a bunch of people over in the Middle East or turn the Middle East to glass or whatnot. But yet you look at what the American government and military did. They did cause a lot of damage over there, and not all of it. I don't think all of it can be justified just as a response to 9/11. And so, like, everything you're saying, it's not really in conflict, I think, with the underlying criticism that Israel needs to defend its people. The government, if government exists, it has to defend against violence, and stopping terrorists is good. But I would just kind of challenge Israelis and even Americans who think that the problem is, as they put it, the conception was wrong. I'd go, well, maybe your conception was right, and your government just failed to actually make it happen. And and the efforts you did, locally as people trying to give Palestinian jobs. Again, I think it's tough. I think that you're saying, well, they said, well, it's not ethnically cleansing. We're just removing terrorists. Again, maybe I'm not saying that's easy, but we have to also think about what are the second, third order consequences about 10, 20, 30 years down the road based on what's happening now. And I don't know that any of us can really, if we actually stopped and we really thought about it, and we thought about what it would be like to be born in Gaza and grow up in Gaza. And I'm not saying that's all the Israeli government's fault. That's also Hamas's fault. That's also, I'm not saying there's no
Britain
impact.
And Russia, don't forget them.
And Britain and Russia too.
And Britain and Soviets,
the Brits, it's like we don't have, that's another 5-hour, 20-hour podcast is talking about how the Brits screwed up after World War I and during World War I. But there's just so much there. But yeah, I just think that often we're living in the moment and we're reacting to things. And I think my encouragement is to always take a step back and just consider that history didn't begin on one particular day, and that actions that might seem justified now, you got to think about what's going to happen 10, 20, 30 years down the road of those consequences. And I'm not saying this from a point of like, I have everything figured out. Like you said, sometimes there are situations where we have to spend a lot of time trying to understand a problem before we figure it out. And I just think that within Israel and within the Western community, there's not enough time spent talking like this, getting past the whole like just taking shots at each other and actually trying to figure this out. So, but I do think you're approaching this in good faith. And even though
this is a huge debate in Israel, like what you just brought up, like that's an entire side of the debate there in Israel too. Like a lot of people don't like Netanyahu or the Likud, which is his party. They don't like those, and a lot of people do. And this is like one of the central debates in the country right now: is were we wrong about the conception? And there's factions. Obviously, Netanyahu's faction, which holds power, is like, yep, we were wrong, and we're going to do something about it. But then there's other factions as well. And so this is like, it's really weird because like history doesn't start at whatever fixed date. It's like, I'll tell you what, you feel that there. People kept asking me, and I know you guys are Christian, like, did you feel like the spirit, like the power of God or whatever in the Holy Land? I'm like, no, but you feel history. Like you're standing there and you're like, over there's the mountain where in Genesis, Abraham comes and sees for the first time the mountain he's taking Isaac to sacrifice him, which is what's under that golden dome, by the way, is the peak of that mountain. And so he like there 3,600 years ago is where Abraham stood with his donkey and Isaac and was like, there it is. And that's where the Jewish religion obviously started. And in the covenant. And so down the valley he goes. The valley's called Gehenna. It's kind of weird to think that this beautiful green park that nobody goes to is hell. And then up the mountain on the other side and like literally, and then up the other side. And that's where it all goes down. And you're like standing there and the stones are like weirdly smooth because feet have been traveling across the exact stones in some cases that you're standing on for a couple thousand years. They're slippery, as a matter of fact. It's almost dangerous in some places to walk around Jerusalem if it rains at all, because like even without the rain, the stones are slick because they've been walked over for so long. It's like you like live in this history. So you do get that sense. But I mean, they're having this debate, and I
agree with you.
There are people that are taking your position in this debate. There are people who are taking Netanyahu's position. There are people who are taking other positions. There are people who are taking idiotic leftist positions and communist positions. And I mean, there are actually, Muslim members of the Knesset, believe it or not. I mean, everybody says, Candace Owens said it's an apartheid state. They've got freaking Muslims in the parliament. What are you talking about? Like, that's not very apartheid. That's like the worst apartheid ever.
It is tough though. Like, I mean, you got to admit there's something weird about I'm not saying it's apartheid for Muslims, but the Palestinian people have lived in it's not easily politically defined. They don't have their own sovereignty. They're not citizens of Israel, but the borders are controlled on one side by Israel, one side by Egypt. So I don't know. I'm not saying there's listen, it's just like, sometimes we struggle to come up with the right term for something, but there are, I think at the very least, if I was an Israeli and I'm ethnically Jewish, I have a lot of pride in my Jewish heritage. My dad was a Jewish conversion to Christianity. And I grew up understanding the connections of the Jewish faith in the Old Testament, pointing forward to Christ and significance of so many of the Jewish traditions and histories. And I love the country of Israel. I love that there's a place where the holy sites of my faith and of the Jewish faith are protected and cherished. But I just wonder, like, if I was an Israeli living in that country, and you asked me to like describe the political nature of like what the Palestinians live in, I'd be kind of uncomfortable with how closely it does seem to resemble apartheid. Like, even if you can like nitpick and say it's not really an apartheid state, I'd say it's too close for comfort for the last 50 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, the name for it's the two-state solution, and that's part of the conception is that they're now saying that probably wasn't the way to go. But what the solution is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I personally, just my idea, like I think we've seen this work elsewhere. Like, you need a binational state. But I understand the Jewish people have a worry about like, what if we're not the majority in our own nation because of the last, I mean, not just, the last, 2,500 years, even the last 200 years. So I think, personally, I'll end on this and let Doug say something to close us out.
Yeah, I can wrap this up because I can tie a bow on this based on what we've talked about. So go ahead, Jay.
I think I want people to have I want the right to have more sympathy for the Palestinian people than I see on a daily basis. But that should not be to the exclusion of sympathy for the Jewish people, which I have seen other people on the right and even on the left start to lose. And that's definitely a problem. I do think
bigly missing.
Yeah.
I think the conversation we had earlier about civilization versus catharsis is probably really relevant here, because the right way forward, James, like you say, is the way of choosing civilization, which is harder. It takes something to build. When I read that, I thought of Jonah Goldberg's thought in Suicide of the West. This is not natural. It takes effort to keep. And this whole idea that the catharsis, you don't name it that way, but I think you'd probably agree, is an old conception that my tribe is better than your tribe and we just have to dominate.
Yeah, it's pagan.
It's pagan in that regard. It also leads to the mimetic, Rene Girard's mimetic theory of like, we just have the mob, and we're going to blame, in this case, some people are blaming the Jews, whatever it is. We can move forward with, we're going to blame the terrorists. We're going to blame Trump. We're going to blame Netanyahu. And so there's a cathartic experience of saying, well, we've gotten rid of all the terrorists. I remember 20 years ago when at the time I was in favor of the Iraq war because I didn't know any better. The liberals who were telling me that this was wrong is you can't just kill all the terrorists and terrorism goes away. That's not how that works. And I agree. It's
insurgent math. You kill 10, 20 more pop up.
Right. And even if it's only a 1-to-2 ratio, it still doesn't work. Right. So like this whole idea that we can cathart our way. I don't even think that's a word. I'm just making it.
It's not a word.
It's not a word. It is, because I just used it. It's referring to something in the real world, James. Anyway.
Calm down, Derrida.
Oh gosh.
I don't know what the word is. Mean. Yeah. Anyway, we can't lead the way into the future that way. It has to be through civilization.
Yeah, of course. The building is central. That's the hard part, right? Is that we have to build things. We have to restrain ourselves. We have to have a belief. This is what you were asking about, actually, with the higher principles. And do we live according to our, West is best mindset? And we have to, I think, not only embrace that building impulse, but also side with the people that do that. And of course, as they said in Israel, if you have people who don't want to build, then that's a problem and you'll solve it. And so, that's I think that's the challenge for all of us. And of course, the question is, how do you solve it? It's the insurgent math question. Yeah. How do you solve the problem? And that's the debate of the day there. And that's the debate of the day, I think, here. The biggest thing that I have as a takeaway on those two debates is that there's a hell of a lot of lost in translation from one side of the ocean to the other. What we're seeing in the American debate does not resemble reality at all. Not to say that I got a completely unbiased picture. I talked mostly to conservatives while I was in Israel, but we've got to. Part of the civilization project is, I think, and every Christian, I think, would agree with this, maybe except the Christian nationalists, is that we have to ground ourselves on the rock of truth. We have to be able to discern the situation as accurately as possible. And then we have to make the choice, like coming out of Egypt, to be righteous in how we proceed going forward.
I think it's a good place to end. James, you've given us more time than we asked for, and I appreciate that on important topics. I mean this both metaphorically and probably literally, that I think you're doing the Lord's work because of your commitment to truth. And I think that's important. And I appreciate your working with us and having a conversation. Everybody knows where to find you. We just talked about Twitter all the time. So we know where to find you. We know where to not debate you.
That's right. I'm not going to debate you on Twitter. I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm sorry.
I didn't have the time to ask you, where do you like those things to happen? Like what avenue is best for you on that?
Honestly, it ends up, sometimes I'll do it in DM. I don't mean to be rude. I don't have time for a lot of debate. My research is already demanding. I got a family. I've got other things going on. Typically in person, we just had a great conversation here. We didn't agree on everything. That's perfectly fine. I don't really like Zoom, but stuff like that. It's just a matter of time being the grand enemy. Becoming a busy person makes these things harder to do.
Are you a critical time theorist, James?
No, I just don't have any. I used to say that time is the enemy, and then it was like time is the greatest enemy, and now it's like time is the great Satan. It's like I just don't have any. It's like I'm always kind of
conspiring against you.
I could just put my phone down.
There's that. You're not the only person who said that about you.
Well, they're wrong and I'm right. So,
Well, I'm glad we had this conversation. I hope we have some more in the future. And if we're at similar events like Freedom Fest, that'd be great to meet you in person and not just over. Well, this isn't Zoom, but I know what you meant. So thank you again, James, and we'll let you go at this point and say goodbye.
thanks, bros.
Thanks.